Welcome to the 2020 Candidates Forum. We're glad you're all here, and for those viewing at home, we're glad you're viewing. And want to encourage everybody to vote and to be registered to vote. We have registration forms. Should anybody here need one or have anybody in your household or in your neighborhood who is 18 and over, we really encourage everyone to register to vote. In Vermont, you can register the same day as election, but it's going to be a busy day, so we appreciate registration ahead of time. I'm going to give you a very, very brief outline of tonight, and the first order of business is generating questions, your questions that you want to ask any and all of the candidates here who will soon introduce themselves. The questions should be limited, one question on a card, and let us know who you want the question addressed to. So just raise your hand if you want a card or another card, if you need a pen. Linda, do you need a card? Okay, you're all set. And Tom Little, who is the town moderator and the moderator for this debate, not debate, sorry. Guess what I'm thinking about, who's the moderator for this question and answer, is going to summarize with the help of Lee Suskin, who's also volunteered, kind of collate, coordinate, combine questions, topics, and address them to the people you've asked them to be addressed to. So just raise your hand and be sure you get your questions out there. I want to say thank you to everybody who's here and to everybody who also volunteers for the town. So those of you in the audience and on the panel who are volunteers for the town in any capacity, stand up, please. Peggy, you've got to stand up. So thank you very much for all that you do. And that includes, did I miss any elected officials? I'm going to say Jessica Brumstead had planned to be here, one of our representatives from Shelburne, and there are two hearings tonight. One is on gun control, and there were several constituents from Shelburne, residents, who have traveled to Montpelier to be with her and to be at the hearing. So she sends her regards and best wishes and good luck. I also want to say that we have a disclosure. Tom shared with me that his boss, or one of his bosses, I don't know how many you have, Tom, is the husband of Kate Lally. Lally, how do you say your last name? Lally, sorry, Kate, Lally. And I wanted to be sure that the candidates and all of us were comfortable with that. I did contact all the candidates who agreed, and knowing Tom, that this would be a fair proceeding. And also with that in mind, we asked Lee to step in. Others in the audience had volunteered, and I appreciate you're considering also being in Lee's seat, but we were wanting to have somebody who was not a candidate associated with any of the candidates, et cetera. So that's our full disclosure. You should introduce yourself next. Okay. So my name is Nancy Baker. I've am coordinating this evening, which is just pulling the logistics together. The evening is sponsored by, this year, two sponsors only, and that's the town, Shelburne Town Democrats Committee and Shelburne Town Republicans. And so those folks are going to introduce themselves, say hello to you, and then after that, Tom Little will take over as moderator and introduce, get to the nitty-gritty. Thank you all for being here.
Great turnout tonight. I'm Kate Cross. I'm chair of the Shelburne Democrats. I thank Nancy for her tireless work on this. She worked on this from all over the world, it felt like. And it came together. Thank you, candidates, for all coming. Just a tiny bit about the Democrats. We meet generally once a month, and we're open to all. We discuss mainly events like this on how we can get the word out, encourage people to vote, to get people thinking. We've hosted a couple of book talks. We've hosted different candidate events. Last fall, we had the Chittenden County Senators come for sort of a meet and greet, and you could ask them questions. So we're not, I mean, we are Democrats, and that's not a secret, but we're really trying to get folks involved in the democratic process. So feel free to contact me, or I have to leave early tonight, unfortunately, but Nancy knows how to reach me so that you can get on the email list for that if you'd like to join us. Thanks for coming.
Good evening. I want to thank everyone for coming. My name is Mike Donahue, and I'm the chair of the Shelburne Town Republican Committee. I wanted to thank Nancy once again for pulling this event together, which I think is a great civic event and speaks really well of our political culture here in Shelburne. And I want to thank Kate and the Town Democrats for co-sponsoring it with us. Also like to thank Tom and Lee for helping with the event, and all the candidates for taking the time to offer yourselves in a campaign and your willingness to serve. We're all very fortunate here in Shelburne. I think I've said in previous years that we have, I think, a civic town square that the rest of the state could learn something from, as well as the rest of the country for that matter. The political tensions are getting worse and worse. The discourse is fraught, and increasingly you're seeing it here in Vermont too. But Shelburne keeps the colors flying, and I think that's great. A lot of us work together very closely on the Board of Civil Authority as JPs, here down at Town Hall, basketball, Little League, and at Shelburne Community School. This is a great event, and we should be very grateful to everyone who's willing to offer themselves up for a campaign when a lot of people just don't want to do it anymore. So thanks again, and good luck to everyone.
So before I turn this over to Tom, 2 more points. The candidates will provide contact information. There is one candidate who provided some handouts, so you can take that. And at the end, before they start talking to all of you, I've just asked you to put the information you want. And the other very important thank you is to thank David Webster, who is our timekeeper once again and steps up to the plate and does so many things for the town. So thank you, David. This is David. You could stand up or not, but thanks. Tom, take it away. Just remind people they have still have opportunity.
Right. Okay. We will be receiving questions throughout the proceedings. So we have a lot of them up here now, but if you think of one as the evening goes on, please send it forward. David is our timekeeper. We've got 90 minutes set for this forum. We're going to try to get to the questions as soon as we can. We have about 15 questions so far, and if as I suspect most of them will be addressed to the select board candidates, and if each of them adheres to our guidance of not more than 2 minutes, and you can start to do the arithmetic, we're not likely to get to each and every question, which is why where appropriate, Lee and I are probably going to condense or combine some questions that raise similar issues or are about similar topics, so that we can get as many of them in as we can. And that's something we've done in the past, and it's worked pretty well. In a moment, I'm going to ask each candidate to give a very brief self-introduction, each less than 2 minutes. And then we'll proceed to the questions. I ask that the responses to the questions be concise, to the point, no more than 2 minutes, and addressed to the audience, not to another candidate. I will monitor that. We haven't had any trouble with that in the past, but if we get into some spirited responses, I may need to wield my invisible gavel. We're not planning any rebuttal time, except that if we have time, we may ask for short closing statements, not more than 1 minute each. And some or all of the candidates have agreed to stay on after we close the forum to mingle and answer questions and chat. David will be holding up a 30-second card when you have 30 seconds left in your 2-minute time. So try to keep, and then he has one that says no time. Very existential, David, thank you. And with that, Nancy, unless there's anything else you want to cover, I think that.
Well, I just wondered if you want to instruct the audience about anything like clapping, shouting, booing, and hissing or anything.
Well, are you volunteering to be the sergeant at arms? No. Well, I think that's a point well taken, and that's something that we, as a rule of order at our town meetings, is that, or any organized public forum, is that first of all, it slows the proceedings down. It isn't always taken the right way by everyone, and it then tends to foster more of the same behavior. So if you really like what someone has said, just remind yourself to thank them afterwards. If you disagree with something, you can take it up with them after we adjourn. But no applause and no other oral or other expressions of your sentiments, please. And as I say at town meeting, when someone else is speaking, please treat them as you would like them to treat you if you had the microphone. And we'll all get along pretty well if we do that. Why don't we start with Ken? This is the short introduction period. Just introduce yourself, the office for which you're running, and a little bit about yourself, if you can do that in about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. My name is Ken Scott. I am a candidate for the Champlain Valley School District. Champlain Valley School District as a school director. I like to refer to it as a school board. I have 2 children currently going to Shelburne Community School. I have a 5-year-old who's in pre-K. I have a 7-year-old who's in first grade. We moved here 2 years ago from California. We moved here because of Vermont. We had never been to Vermont before we moved here, except to visit to find out if we wanted to move here. And we picked Shelburne of all the places we looked at. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure was that I gave what I could and could serve where I could. And I've done that here and there. I'm also going to be I'm the incoming, as they refer to me, PTO treasurer. So that was my first involvement. And then I was told that there was an opening for school board, and I feel like that's somewhere that I can contribute and I can help, and I hope to do so. So thank you.
Question for VCAM: Are the mics up here going into VCAM, but not out?
They are they're in intercom, but if people stand up, they're away from the mic. So if you want to pull the mic closer, I'm sorry, you either can hear us or I can't get them when they're small. Unless you want to pick the mic up with you or point it up. There are some seats up here, there's like 6 seats if anyone wants to use that.
Okay.
Welcome to do that.
Mr. Story.
Good evening. First, I want to thank Nancy and the 2 committees for this excellent opportunity and benefit to the community. I'm Jerry Story. I'm running for re-election to the 2-year seat on the select board, which I've served for 4 years at this point, 2 as chair, and to which I believe I am qualified and quite eager to continue.
Thank you. Ruth.
That was too short. So I'm Ruth Hagerman, and I'm pleased to see so many people here. My husband and I moved to Shelburne 10 years ago when he was relocated by his company, and he has now retired, and we're really happy that he's retired someplace we want to stay. We love Shelburne. We think it's a great place. When I first moved here, I was unable to continue my career as a lab scientist, so I took on some freelance work, which I still do. I freelance manuscripts, freelance edit scientific manuscripts. And I have some now spare time, so when I moved here, I started volunteering at the library, and I became a trustee 7 years ago. So I was chair 5 years, and during those 5 years, I was involved in building the library. And I think these experiences, I want to continue helping the town and serving the select board and spending my time with you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Luz?
Hello, my name is Luz Hillman. My husband and I moved here in 1986, and we lived behind Davis Park, and then we are now living over on Dorset Street. We raised 2 children here who went to the Shelburne Community School and CVU and graduated from UVM. When they were at the Shelburne School, I volunteered quite a bit with the ELF, the science program, teaching French, field hockey, junior high. We didn't have a formal program then. And also the dairy program at the 4-H program at Shelburne Farms. I was very involved in all that. My work experience is I am a civil engineer. That's my background. And I am working for UVM. I am a project manager and a assistant director. I oversee a team of engineers that work on deferred maintenance, capital projects, infrastructure projects. So my experience to be on the select board is that I have good technical skills, and I see that we're going to be approaching some hard technical questions with our stormwater, with our new fire rescue building, and I'd like to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate?
Hi, Kate Lally. We've lived here since 2003, raised our family here, and I have been a long-time volunteer in various capacities in the town. Started off on the Paths Committee, most recently the last 12 years on the Planning Commission, and I'm back on the Paths Committee also because I can't seem to stop myself. I'm just, at this point, I'm looking for some new ways to contribute and to serve the town. So I'm running kind of on a platform of, I would like us to grow the grand list so that we can afford more of the things that I heard a lot of people wanting during the budget process that we are unable to really afford at this point. So I think Shelburne is an incredible community with many, many advantages, and I would like to expand our sense of vision about what we can accomplish and how we can do that, and not just in the sense of the physical landscape, but culturally and economically as well. Thanks.
John?
Hi, everyone. How's it going? Yeah, good. Can you hear me better? Good. It's always good to check. Hi, everybody. I am John Pasquarella, and I would like to be a part of your select board. I actually wanted to take a quick moment to thank everyone who helped make this happen tonight, and everyone who supported me over the years and helped get me involved with the town. I appreciate it. So what I'm hoping to do is really just take everything that we currently do now, make it a little bit better, help plan for our future, years, decades, and generations out. I bring experience and a certain level of vision that's come with a decade plus in the tech industry. My story was like a lot of Vermonters, actually. I grew up in Vermont. I went to school in Vermont. I lived in Vermont. And then I left because I was seeking out opportunity and new experiences. And a lot of us do that in our 20s, right? But I was lucky because after only a few years, I was able to come back to Vermont, bring my job with me, and I've been in Shelburne for quite some years. And that was a bit of a catalyst for me to get more involved and try and create more opportunity for people to move to Vermont and live in Vermont and raise families and thrive. And I'd like to retire in Shelburne in maybe 15 years, maybe 20. But that's down the road. Right now, I just really want to make sure that we have a very prosperous town, a very happy town where people are proud to live and encourage their friends to do the same.
Thank you. The first question, I think, will work for all of the candidates. I think it's intended for the select board, but I think it will be easy to frame it to include Ken Scott as well. And it is, thank you. What do you see as the most important issue, or maybe issues, one or two issues, that the select board will face in the next year, and or as the case may be, the Champlain Valley School District will face over that period? And Ken, we'll start with you with regard to the school board.
I think for me, the biggest issue that we're going to face for the school board, is one that's going to continue to, we're going to continue to face for quite some time, which is a backlog of maintenance and construction and updating projects. I spent some time going through, watching the budget process to try to become familiar with it before I decided to run. And that appears that it's going to be one of our bigger challenges, especially with the limitations of the budget and the need to a lot of these projects coming in the form of a bond. I will say I was quite impressed that the staff for the school district have started making a plan, or are in the midst of a plan to. He speaks of vision, to show the vision of the path towards being able to accomplish those things. But nonetheless, with always an issue with budgets, it's going to be a challenge. So I think those are going to be, that in particular is going to be the biggest challenge for the school board, is the continuing need for bonds. And I believe people have referenced that there's an article that there's $500 billion of updates that need to be done throughout the state. And our school district has not been left out of that. So there's going to be issues that we're going to face, and I think that's going to be the biggest challenge.
Thank you, Ken. There's been a request from the audience for clarification about, for the select board candidates, which seat are you running for? And I think I can get that straight. Jerry Story is running for re-election to the 2-year seat, and the other 4 candidates are running for election to the 3-year seat. Okay?
We have a sample ballot here, so people can take a look at your.
Sure. Back to the one or two most important issues the select board will face. Luce, you can go next.
Um,
I'm going to sort of shake it up.
Okay, all right, that's a good idea. In the short term, I think everybody that I've talked to is concerned about the fire rescue building and the fact that we need it, but what is it truly going to cost? And I know that is still being worked on. So I think that's going to be an issue that we're going to be looking at. Right now, we're spending a little over $1 million out of our budget on debt service. So we have to think about that when we look at putting in this new building and what impact that's going to have. The other issue is infrastructure. We have a new stormwater policy that's coming into effect this coming year. And so I think that's an important element that we're going to be looking at. And also our wastewater treatment plant, where we're looking at different alternatives on whether we're going to improve our plant combined with South Burlington. These are important short-term issues in the next few years that are going to have a big impact on our budget, and we need to plan accordingly and make sure we're doing the best solution for Shelburne.
Ruth?
Okay. All right. So I organized my answer differently than she did, but it's pretty much the same. So I organized it under water. So we have stormwater. There's an ordinance currently being reviewed by the select board, and that's going to impact everybody's pocketbook. Even people who haven't paid previously for stormwater are now going to be beginning to be charged for that. We have some questions about infrastructure in Route 7 for whether or not the piping really is big enough to carry the flow as Route 7 develops, so that's being looked into. And then we do have the wastewater treatment plants. We have 2. And I actually went on a tour today And it's pretty amazing what they're telling you about the wastewater as you go over there. They're starting to buy parts on eBay because the equipment is so old that you can't just get on and order new parts from the manufacturer. If they can't find them on eBay, then they kludge them together with extra wiring and hopefully not rubber bands. So the wastewater treatment plants are really going to be, I think, a big issue, and I know the town's beginning to put together proposals and costs of proposals. And then the other question is going to come up is fire rescue. And like Lou said, we're waiting for that to come back from the committee that's looking into it. And once we find from them whether or not, first of all, it's really going to be feasible, can they get the permits they need, how's that all going to work out, then we would have to talk about, is this something we're willing to do? When would we do it, keeping in mind that we have all these other infrastructure needs? So I think those are going to be tough conversations over the next 6 months. So thanks.
Kate?
I would say that my greatest concerns are around the level of debt that we have and in our mounting stormwater liabilities. So they are increasing, and they've been estimated to ultimately impact the town, upwards of $8 million, which is quite concerning. So I see the solution as to simplify as looking for opportunities to grow the grand list. We have some wonderful advantages here that we could be leveraging more. So rather than looking for ways to kind of cut up the same pie in ever smaller pieces, I would like to find ways to leverage some of these opportunities. So a couple of them would be the form-based zoning that we have for Route 7, and I know that's kind of a wonky topic, but it's basically a type of zoning that will allow us to attract new investment so we can revitalize Route 7, but not just revitalize it with any old development, but revitalize it with really good development that will be sustainable, that will be located where it needs to be. Some of our two impaired streams, which are the source of much of our stormwater woes, they wander through the Route 7 area. So it's really, really important that we redevelop properly in that area. And because it's already existing developed area, if we can encourage development to go there rather than in places where it's not, that's another way to keep things looking good in Shelburne, improve aesthetics, and also improve the functionality. So I would be for, if I were elected, really promoting the mandatory adoption of this zoning in the Route 7 corridor. And the other thing I would like to do is pursue economic development that leverages the tremendous opportunities that we have here. We have the top 3 tourism venues in the state here. We have extraordinary scenic and recreation resources, and I think we could do more to kind of harness those to bring in, I'm out of time, revenue.
John and then Jerry.
Thanks. So the town actually has a bit of a tough decision, right? You have 4 people going for 1 chair for 3 years. And the reality is whoever sits in it is going to help really set the tone for years to come. We've heard some really good things tonight, but I think the reality is, as far as development goes, we're probably expected to see a lot happen or be talked about the Route 7 corridor, how we're going to better manage the traffic that's there, the traffic of cars and people and stuff and drugs and everything that happens really through our town so fast every day we sometimes forget. But also about bringing more people into town to stay and enjoy and spend the weekend, even if they're local from a different part of the state. Really making sure we have someone on that board who can take a plan and put it into action and do so under budget with less time and less headaches than normal, is probably where our biggest opportunity lies in the next year or two. Setting a tone and planting the seeds for a really strong corridor throughout Route 7.
Thank you, Jerry.
I think in a word, the major concern is affordability. Whether that's a matter of any of us living here, or whether that's a matter of the town being able to continue to offer the level of services that we are, or whether that's a question of such increasing pressure on expenses that we have to begin economizing in ways that we're not prepared to. We face some very critical points, as several of my potential colleagues have already noted tonight, where a balance is going to need to be struck between long-term investment, which is in our case a considerable need. There's a good deal of deferred maintenance, and we have new projects as they've identified, versus providing adequately for the existing service level. I think affordability, our great reliance on tax as a revenue base, the fact that we have a flat grand list, that we have to look at alternative revenues as a matter of course, it would seem to me that's our greatest concern.
Thank you. Next question for the select board candidates. This is actually three questions came in on this topic, which is the Open Space Fund and the Open Space Fund decision-making process. And I think the combining these into one question would go something like this. And we'll start with Kate. Do you support or oppose the Select Board's decision to remove the Open Space Fund as a separate ballot item and convert it into the budget process? Okay.
I think I'm kind of agnostic for now on that topic of whether or not it remains on the ballot. It's been something that has been, I know that was controversial to do that, but it's been something that's been always supported by voters. So I guess for now, I would be comfortable leaving it in that position. I would like it to be larger than it is, because I think it's so important. And I would like to work on ways that we can, grow the commercial grand list so that we can bring in the revenues, so that we can restore it back to being as a part of our budget. But for the moment, I think I'm comfortable with having it on the ballot item, because it's something that Shelburne voters vote every time consistently to show how important that is to them.
Okay. Next is Luce.
Yes, I think even though Shelburne voters vote every time, I think it's important because we may have, as we were just hearing, affordability issues. I think we need that option. We all love open space. Who doesn't love open space? But we're going to have to look real carefully in the future on what we're going to purchase and what we're not going to purchase. So I'd like to see it remain the way it is, where it is on the ballot.
Thank you. John?
I'm sure there'll be other opportunities where I might be able to disagree, but I think I can agree in this situation. A couple of reasons. I think the separation helps carve it out, and it allows it to see kind of have a bigger voice in the vote. Additionally, it's something that was supported, so not at risk.
Ruth, and then Jerry.
Okay, so the Open Space Fund is on the ballot, right, this year. It's not been put back into the budget. It's being voted on separately, right? I believe that's correct, yeah, okay. I think that there are a lot of different reasons for doing each option, and we would have to decide. I think that's something worth discussing again. Sometimes it seems to me like important decisions are kind of all squished up together during budget season instead of being pulled out and talked about separately. So that would be one thing. We should actually talk about the Open Space Fund. Is it a separate ballot item, or does it stay within the budget? I think we should talk about the size of the Open Space Fund, because property in Shelburne is ferociously expensive. The median price last year for property houses in Shelburne was $575,000. That's the median. What that means is that land is really expensive, and us putting $30,000 a year into a fund, it's better than nothing. but we can't, and we use it to leverage other purchases, I understand that, but it would be more efficient to have more money so that when land actually came up, if you wanted to buy it, so that we could link our open space land together into a more uniform and kind of concise pattern, it'd be good to have more money. And I think we should look at that. I did suggest, I think you saw in the newspaper, that fundraising is something that many departments in this town do. Fundraising is something that the library did very successfully. Fundraising is something that some private groups have done to improve the La Platte nature area. And I think it's something that the Open Space Fund could really look into, because they're very popular. We know that from essentially the survey we give them every year on the ballot. So.
Thank you. Jerry?
I have, I think, 3 thoughts about that. In my background, I was a town manager for roughly 17 years and learned the business from the position of a manager and a clerk in a town of 700 people, in which case you learn to do everything, including make carbon copies. And we had town meetings where every item was discussed at some length. This is not apocryphal. There are town meetings where razors and pencils are discussed as an expenditure. I believe strongly in it because I think it's the exemplar of local government. I don't think we should behave or be treated any differently than your family and your friends treat you, and you treat them around your kitchen and other places where you gather to talk about whether you can afford $5 or $6 or whether you can afford any at all. On the other hand, in a composite budget such as we recently concluded and are going to propose to you for your approval at town meeting, we considered open space along with everything else. So it was not considered separate from every other item in the budget. And we allocated monies in a relative sense to the greatest needs, and accordingly allocated a certain amount to open space. So to treat it separately from the body of items that have a budget that we're proposing seems to me to miss the point a little bit. On the other hand, finally, there is not enough open space. There is not enough space to be opened every day. It's diminishing, and the issue is of great concern. Thank you, David.
The next one was typewritten. I want you to know. Someone came and this is generally about pedestrian and bike safety, particularly in the village area. And there's probably about 6 different sub-questions in here, so we're going to try to collapse those a little bit. But if you think back about recent changes that have been made in the village to aid in pedestrian safety, to reduce car speeds, what do you think has worked, and what do you think still needs to be done to achieve those goals? John, we'll start with you.
I like this one. So last year my big focus was energy and being on the energy subcommittee and helping with that portion of the town plan, but transportation's always been something of an interest to me. So I had been looking at it like, how can we harness energy from it? But yeah, so traffic, transportation, I actually know a little bit of the science behind some of the data. I've seen a lot of the different machines and technology that were used out west to try and manage traffic. I think one thing we do really well in this town is we have the conversation. It's surprisingly effective. I think if anyone is concerned with the speed of cars, the traffic, their safety when walking, make it be heard. I think that's the biggest thing, actually. I live in the village. We have, I think, 20,000 cars a day come through. I'd have to check. It's a big number. So it's really important that we stay involved and help make sure that we're kind of taking more back when it comes to just car-related traffic throughout the village. So I got a little lost in maybe one of those six questions.
Okay. Kate, Lally, you're next.
So I think that some of the interventions that have been happening are helping to calm traffic. I think that there is an awful lot more that needs to be done. And one of the things that I think would be really helpful to have would be some kind of a manual and formal system for how we can pilot and try out projects, because they're, it's very expensive to rehab our streets, and we want to be sure that we get it right. And so if we can have a way to quickly try out solutions or things that we think might be effective solutions and sort of demo them. And this can be done with things like chalk and hay bales and, very, very inexpensively. And you can upgrade to, large flower pots for something that might stay longer. And then we could have maybe get feedback from people on like how they think this is working. Is it benefiting? Could we be doing something differently? And then we could, use that as a way to start to make decisions about what we want to direct more scarce resources to for changing the roads. But it's a big challenge. We have roads that are primarily designed for the convenience of getting cars from A to B, and now people want to walk and be able to get around on foot, particularly in the village. And we've got a big job in front of us with rehabbing our roads.
Thank you. Ruth?
Okay, so full disclosure here, I walk at least 3 miles a day around the village. I start up Thompson and come this direction. And I have to say that on my walk, there are places that I'm terrified, and there are places that I'm not terrified, and there are places that, it just kind of depends. So I think that's part of the problem with this whole discussion, is that everybody where you walk, where you are, is where you think the safety issue is. So as far as I think what we're really talking about probably mostly is the whole Falls Road and Marset area, because that's where most of the attention has been lately. My observation is that what has worked to help slow cars down are those radar-activated speed signs, because you'll go along and it will start blinking at you even though you're only going 33 miles an hour. I think that what we need to add to them is what they have in Iceland, which is a little smiley face below it, and the smiley face gets bigger and bigger and bigger the slower that you go. So it can really encourage people to go like 20 miles an hour. So I think there are definitely places that could use a lot of work. I think Kate's idea of sort of just going out there and saying, well, what would happen if we bumped this out a little bit? How does that impact cars? Does it make pedestrians feel safer? How do we incorporate bicycles into this? I do think we have this major problem here where we are, not only are we a car culture, but we don't have a lot of ways for cars to get places. And that's why they're out there, is they're trying to get home. We don't have a lot of options on roads, and I'm not really sure how you fix that. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, Jerry?
I think the achievement in the last 3+ years has been to raise this issue to the point of town practice. Because before that, there was not an active interest in it. There is now. Second, I think you pair it with you pair walkability with bikeability, because I think they are sides of the same issue. So the difficulty anybody has riding a bike on Dorset is in many ways similar to the difficulty anybody has walking from the post office to the Shelburne supermarket. It seems to me that one of the most beneficial results of the number of demonstrations and pilot projects that have been mounted and successfully and concluded is traffic calming measures, something as simple as narrowing lanes. So some of the visual prompts have, in my experience, riding pretty regularly from Maplewood to downtown, it's pretty obvious to me that there has been a reduction in speed on Falls Road and Marset. This effort was generated by a neighborhood group which have never insisted that they be the only neighborhood group getting such attention, but simply were advocating for their own local concern. It would be nice to see other neighborhood groups step forward with the same kinds of concerns and issues. And I think if our goal is a walkable, bikeable Shelburne, which is something I believe very strongly in, then I think we need to be inviting input from many more neighborhoods and many more advocates, and would welcome such.
Luce.
I understand that we reduced the speed limit, and I do think that that helps going through the village. I also know that looks like we put up larger stop signs at the four-way intersection by Marset Road, and they also have red bars, if you haven't noticed that. I don't know if those have helped a lot or not, but I know that that was done not too long ago. I think one of our biggest areas right in the village is by the country store, and the sidewalk ends there, and I think the problem is that's their parking. And so kind of creatively thinking of maybe what we can do to help them with their parking, and also try to allow for a sidewalk somehow in that area. And maybe it is by narrowing the lanes or trying another method there. But that seems to be kind of a tricky area right there, because our businesses are very important and we don't want to impact them. So I think it just takes a lot more thought and a lot more, some trial and error to try to get the walkways through the village a little bit safer for everybody.
And I think I'll extend this question to you, Ken. You have, the school children use the sidewalks in the village heavily. Do you have any reflections on this from the perspective of the schools?
Certainly, I was enjoying quite a few of the answers that I think identify what I've seen as well, which is I've enjoyed that there's been a conversation going on about this, and I think that there are some steps taken. There's been some missteps, not drastically or terribly, but not everything's going to work out well, but you have to try things. And I think that people are discussing things, and things have been tried. You're listening about the stop signs and the speeds. As a parent, I will say my view is that I appreciate that there's things being done, that this issue is being addressed, and that we're giving it our attention, and I think that's going to work towards the effect of what I like, really what Jerry said, the walkable, bikeable Shelburne, and I think we're headed that direction, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Next question is an affordable housing question that has some ties into a theme of economic development in Shelburne, but we have some questions more on that, so I'm going to separate them for the time being at least. And this one I'll start with you, Jerry. And I'm going to just read through these three questions because I think they're essentially the same question. 83% of businesses in the county identify housing as their second biggest obstacle to job growth. How will you make sure Shelburne is creating affordable housing? How do you feel about affordable housing, and do you know how much affordable housing we have already in Shelburne? The town plan ties economic growth with affordable housing. What will you do to make sure affordable housing is available? What say you, Jerry?
Well, I think you start with the fact that we are a community largely of single-family homes. And the opportunities for certainly constructing affordable housing are going to be limited and may require some sort of subsidization in some form of incentive, whether it's federal or state, in which case we'd be an active partner, but not necessarily a participant. I look forward to the benefits of form-based zoning, which we are busy. We've seen adopted in now one case, possibly two, and look forward to much more future adoption of it, because I think that is one path to the development of affordable housing. The issue is extreme in our part because we don't have affordable housing in single-family homes either. We're not reputed for affordable housing across the income spectrum. And that's got to be a concern of ours as well.
Okay. Luce, you're next.
I think to get more affordable housing will be the form-based zoning, which will allow for more dense development, and that would allow us to increase our housing because, as Jerry said, we are mostly single-family homes right now, and it is very expensive to live in Shelburne. I do not know how many units of affordable housing we now have. I know that was one of the questions, but I believe it's the zoning that's going to help us to get to where we need to go to make it more affordable.
Okay. Kate.
Yes, we're doing not terribly on affordable housing units, but we could be doing much better. The form-based zoning is helping with some of that. Several of the candidates have mentioned that, we are a community of single-family housing, and I think I would like to say that I think that's one of our challenges. I think we have maybe enough single-family housing, and what we really need is more housing diversity. For people who want to age in place and in the sense of aging in the community, but would like some place to downsize to. We've lost a number of really wonderful long-time residents because there were really no options for that, and they left to go elsewhere. And I think also that would allow us to provide, what used to be called starter homes or residences for people who are maybe smaller families. I mean, the sort of 1950s American family, which is, what the single-family house is based on, is there's less and less of that. So I think we just need to we need to think more flexibly about how housing can emerge, where it can emerge, and in what forms, and also if it can emerge on more compact pieces of land that are connected, walkable, bikeable. That will also help to cut down on some of the costs.
Thank you. Ruth, and then John.
Okay, so for affordable housing, I was trying to figure out the other day how if you worked at Wake Robin, which is a good place to work, but their people don't get paid a huge amount of money, how would you actually get there? You can't live in Shelburne if you work at Wake Robin because there's no way you could afford to buy a house here. You can't even afford the rents here. So you could drive there, and we just talked about how we don't want people driving here. So you could take the bus there, but then think about where the bus stop is and then where Wake Robin is, and that's a pretty major hike downhill and then back up the hill, and then you'd have to do it again. So we really do need to improve housing in this town for people who work, and that is, for Shelburne, that is what affordable housing is. So I told you $575,000 for single-family housing last year, $375,000 for a condominium last year. So we really need to bring in, again, more dense housing, which does require not only changes in the zoning with the form-based zoning, but it also requires the town to agree to this. We as a town need to really get behind the idea of affordable housing because often a good project will be proposed and then people will take a stand against it and then the project will vanish. I think another thing that we could actually do is we could make more of an effort to reach out to Champlain Housing Trust and say, hey, we really want to work with you and bring in more affordable housing. We could reach out to Habitat for Humanity, which is always looking for places to build. We could actually go ahead and initiate some of those conversations instead of just waiting for someone to come to us and say, hey, Shelburne, it's time for you to have more affordable housing. So.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. A few perspectives on this as a homeowner here, a landlord here. I've seen a few different things in my time. I think the real difficult thing with affordable housing is this term. It's really hard to define. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to define it. I'm willing to bet, though, if we asked everyone in the room, we might have a slightly different definition of it. So I'm I'm hoping we change the definition. Maybe we can do it tonight. High value housing, right? So we're seeing this trend with people of, I think someone mentioned it, people of all ages, but especially younger demographics, buying value, not size, right? They're buying or building smaller homes. These are high value, highly optimized, efficient homes. When designed well, they're better than their larger counterparts on objectionable. I'm saying the wrong word. Not subjective, right? Yeah, objective. Thanks. So now that I lost my train of thought, yeah, just high value housing. We only have so much land here in Shelburne to build on. We have some we can reuse. But when it comes to housing, bottom line, I'd like to see high value housing throughout Shelburne. Especially that would be at a lower overall price point. It would enable more people to come to Vermont, live in Vermont, and raise their families here.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to, these two questions sort of relate to potential capital projects, infrastructure projects in town. Both of them have been around for a long time. And starting with Luce, I'd like your comment or response on one or both of these, and if you can, if there's a third capital or infrastructure project you want to get in with within your 2 minutes, that would be fine too. The first one is, what is your position on Pond Road stabilization? And the second is, what is your position on a new town beach house? Luce?
The new town beach house, I understand we're looking for donations for the beach house, and it is desperately needed, and I'm hoping that we can do it with donations because it's a well-used town beach. The Pond Road stabilization, boy, that's a very interesting topic, right? You have citizens on both sides who some want it paved and some do not want it paved. So when I met with Paul, I've noticed, and when I met with Paul Goodrich a couple weeks ago, we talked about it, and one of the ideas we bantered around was pave the section where the people who really want it paved are the ones closest to Dorset Street, and not pave the other end, which is where all the amphibians cross. And so that might be a solution. It's kind of an odd one, but that might be a compromise that works out for the people that don't want to drive on a dirt road and they exit via Dorset Street, pave that to the fishing access, then stop the rest of it. So anyway, that's kind of, I'm on the fence on that one. As far as what was the other, you want to know other capital projects?
Another capital or infrastructure project that you wanted to mention.
Well, I think the utility ones that we're going to be looking at is going to be, the town has to look at in the next few years, is really going to take a lot of our efforts to try to decide the best way to proceed. So those are going to be, I think, the major capital projects, and then the fire and rescue building, understanding the implications, the total cost, the new construction, permitting, and what are we going to do with the old station. Let's not forget, people like to forget the money they need to renovate the building they're abandoning, and that is going to be a big ticket item that we really have to take a look at. The rescue building is not in great shape, so that one I don't know what we're going to do with, but probably, if we move ahead, I'm not sure what would happen to that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry, you're next.
Yeah, I agree with I agree with your comment about the rescue building. It needs to be replaced. It cannot be basically repaired in place. It's now subject to some environmental constraints with the recent extension of the no-build zone from La Platte. I'm a little hesitant to say what I intend to do about these other two because we don't yet have the information in front of us that we've asked for. And that's not a cop-out. That's just a matter of how we proceed. Whether we run a chip seal treatment on Pond Road to Frog's End, and as a compromise in many ways, a compromise of treatment, a compromise of space, or not, is going to depend upon some careful thought and consideration of the pros and cons a little later this spring. and everybody who's been involved in that decision has been made aware of that, and when the time comes, we'll have that discussion. I think the same is going to be true of the fire rescue altogether. We're some distance, as Ruth noted, from determining site suitability, and some months away from a potential decision at the latest in November to move ahead with the purchase and acquisition. And
Okay, thank you. Next is Kate.
Regarding the stabilization of Pond Road, I'm aware of that there's strong arguments on both sides. I don't have enough knowledge to really make a call. Just been paying attention to, as what's been in the newspaper and how things are coming in. The town beach house, and then the fire and rescue. Again, these are, and probably the Pond Road issue too, to some degree. These are for me questions of revenue. I think these are all really important issues for the town to be able to address, and I think we need to increase revenue streams so that we can do so. And by that I mean by growing the grand list and not raising taxes, because but we can't defer too long because these problems are worsening as we fail to take action on them. So that's, I guess that's what I would say.
John and then Ruth.
Great. So I like CapEx. I like to spend money to make money. I especially like to spend money if it's free money. And so how do you get there, right? You spend money to save money. You spend money that will preserve money, so you have extra money to spend on things when it comes up. I think some really good points were made on Pond Road. That's a complicated one. The town beach house, I think there was a local designer did a nice job with that for sure. And fire and rescue. I think ultimately infrastructure, I don't have a pet list myself on what I want to see built. I just want to see this town thriving in all parts. I think my part in helping with that is really making sure fiscal responsibility, making sure we're doing really well with our money because it's mistakes in the good times that lead to the bad times, right? So, and I think no matter how big the budget is, we can find some bootstraps on it and pull it up. Make sure we're spending our money wisely so that we can put it into bigger things, like what we've talked about here. I think the easy way to do that is just, be a little wiser in how we're spending money and cut out mistakes as much as possible.
Thank you. Ruth?
Okay, so this kind of question is hard for me to answer because I'm really matrix oriented. So if I were actually doing this, I would have a gigantic piece of paper, and I would probably do it with a paper. I wouldn't do it on my computer. I would have on one side, I would have every single infrastructure project. It's sort of like the capital improvement plan does. And then I would have kind of a projected date by which we really need to do it. So for example, the wastewater treatment plants, I said eBay, right? And then you would have your cost estimates, and then you would begin to have the specific facts, like something like Pond Road. There's the cost of Pond Road. There's the cost of paving it versus the cost of maintaining it every year. Then there are personal arguments about whether or not it's safe. I guess that's not a personal argument, but there are arguments about its safety. There are arguments about its dustiness. And all of those things then are in kind of this far right-hand column. So it's really hard for me to answer a question like this without having it all gridded out like that. So you asked specifically about Pond Road, and Pond Road, I did watch the budget hearings, and I know that the town is waiting for data back on that. That is a really hard question to answer because a lot of people have very strong emotions on it on both sides. Unbelievably enough, it's hard to believe that we care that much about paving a road, but we do. So that's a tough one. The beach house, you have a plan that you've put together for what looks like a really great building, and then the question is how to finance it. And like I said earlier, I think that a project like that, we really should discuss the idea of doing some fundraising for it. And I know that the rec committee has gone out and done a little bit. The library, we learned a lot about fundraising, and we'd love to share that knowledge with people. I'm not saying that a project even that size needs to be 100% fundraised, but I think we could make some progress towards at least making it a little less expensive. The fire rescue, again, we don't really know what's up with that. So that's, I guess, not much of an answer, but I'm uncomfortable without my big piece of paper.
I'll share a quick story about the last time the Pond Road thing became a big issue, and there was this uproar of opposition to paving it. I sent a note to the select board suggesting that there was so much support for one dirt road in town, maybe they should put on the ballot unpaving some other paved road. And they didn't think that was very helpful. They didn't think that was very helpful. This is another sort of a interesting infrastructure and services provocative question. There's two of these that are pretty much the same thing. How would you collaborate and coordinate services and other programs with neighboring communities like South Burlington? For example, public safety, capital expenditures, facility or equipment like fire trucks. Will you be open to consolidating our fire service with South Burlington and then avoid building another firehouse? And there was another question relating to whether the candidates supported the library bond. Perhaps you could, if that's one version of collaboration with other communities, you might want to mention that as well. But we'll start out on that one with John and then go to Ruth. John?
All right. So, collaboration's king. It's how we accomplish more than what we can do ourselves. So would I? Yes. Have I in part? Yeah. The energy subcommittee worked with different ideas of collaborating with other towns, state-run agencies, things like that. So I think there may have been more to that a little bit as far as the cost and partnering our fire departments. I think our Shelburne rescue is pretty awesome. I'd probably have to look into it a little bit more. My understanding was that they're great and we want to keep them to ourselves. And I guess I'm okay with that given what they do. I was formerly an emergency responder, so I definitely am supportive of all of our fire departments and LEO. Did you ask about library bond?
There is a question of whether the candidates supported the library bond, and I kind of threw it in with these other community sharing projects to see if there was any bite on that. Anyone who's interested in that.
Yeah, you can check the tape. That was something that was really important to me. I was really excited about the idea of a library. I thought the concepts were really great. I'm glad we have it. I'm really happy we have it. It's pretty amazing. I think those are the type of projects where I could come in and make sure that we're managing them within our budget and our time and our resources and really making sure that we're fully optimizing those new build, new construction opportunities we have.
Thank you. Ruth, and then Jerry.
Okay, so let's see here. You asked about combining services with neighbors, which I totally think is something we should consider for many services, although it's not possible for all of them. So one of the proposals that's going to come out for wastewater is pumping all of our waste up to South Burlington. And so we'll have to see how that comes to us cost-wise. Dispatch, frankly, we already share dispatch services with a very large number of towns. They contract with us, and then calls come here, and then they go back out to the emergency responders in those towns. So we already have consolidation there. Rescue, if you go over and take a tour of the rescue station, they'll show you the rescue schedule of they only have one ambulance out at a time. And the backup for if suddenly we need 2 ambulances in town, the backup is, depending on where you are in Webster, it's either UVM or it's Charlotte. So we already actually share rescue services as well. I don't know about the fire services, but I do know that we are essentially in a fire district. So we do share. Whether or not we can not build a fire station because there's South Burlington and Charlotte, I actually don't know the answer to that. That is a fire chief question, not a Ruth question. I think it's worth asking him, but the library, okay, so obviously I supported the library bond. Okay, that's kind of a silly question. I will tell you that the library, so one of the very first things that I did after I worked really hard for the first couple of years as a trustee to really convince myself that Shelburne needed a new library, because when I got here, I really honestly didn't believe that. So I worked really hard for about 2 years collecting data, talking to people, going out and touring around other libraries and really finding out what was going on. So after I did that, then I actually met with the state. So the state has the Vermont Department of Libraries, which works with all the libraries in the state and tries to help especially our smaller communities who each have their own library. And I said, really, seriously, that's not really tenable. And can't we, I'm sorry, oh man. Okay, we tried to consolidate, let me just say that.
Jerry, and then Kate, and then Luce.
At one point, I farmed, and there's no better example of the imbecility of every farm having a hay rake than hay season. And because for the other 9.5 months of the year, they all sit in people's yards or around the corner, but no one wants to share it because no one wants to be without one when they want to hay. And haying takes place pretty much in a pretty confined time frame. That's a problem. The rational being is always going to feel very lonely in town government talking about regionalization and collaboration. Because as rational as it sounds, it's in many, many respects unworkable. Beginning with the fact that each community has a belief in its own exceptionalism and therefore its need to have its own X, Y, Z, whether that's dispatch, fire, schools, or whatever. We do actually collaborate on multi-community programs such as solid waste. But it's doubtful we're going to be willing to cooperate on police. It's doubtful we're going to be able to willingly collaborate on fire. And only at the point when we as a community decide that these services are at risk, if we don't shed some of the cost and collaborate, will we ever take really solid steps in those directions. As much as I like it, much as I think it's grand, as rational as it is, as sensible as it is, you'd have to, the community and how it feels about itself, what it wants of its own, under its own control, has to come first.
Okay. Kate, and then Luce.
Okay. In theory, I am all for collaborating and coordinating with our surroundings as much as possible. I certainly know that we're doing that, I think, very effectively with our stormwater right now, where we have a contract with South Burlington where we hire them to do, among other things, to review some of our development proposals to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to reduce stormwater runoff and comply with all applicable state regulations. So we're doing some things already, and there was a very interesting meeting with the Planning Commission recently on opportunities that we could do more of that. I'm not as knowledgeable about how the feasibility of sharing with fire and rescue. Dispatch seems to be something that potentially could maybe be a revenue source for us if we're doing that really well. And effectively, maybe other towns could hire us to do some of that, and that might be a way to sort of help offset some costs. Anyway, I think there's some opportunities that that could exist to do things more effectively. I'm most familiar with this in the realm of stormwater management, but there may be some applications out there that would be worth pursuing. And yes, I supported the library bond.
I'll start with the easy one. The library is terrific. It's a community space, and it was desperately needed, and thank you, Ruth, for helping out on that. And as far as collaboration with other towns, for fire, we have to think about response time. Because remember, if the fire truck's coming from South Burlington, that's a little ways away, so that will impact your fire insurance on your home. And it might still be a solution, but it is impact the response time to our community. One way we might want to collaborate is as if we can continue with volunteer staffing at the fire station, but we may need to go more to full-time firefighters, and there might be a way to collaborate with staffing between the two communities. That might work. I don't know. We do work with South Burlington on stormwater, as was said. We actually went out to bid. I haven't found out what the results were on that bid, but constructed a gravel wetlands that's actually takes care of both South Burlington and Shelburne. Those bids came in last week, and we would get the phosphorus credit for that, but we'd manage the construction of the project. But it benefits both South Burlington and Shelburne, but we're getting a good benefit from that if that happens. So wastewater, the same thing. We'd want to work with South Burlington, and again, we have to look at what is the long-term total cost of ownership for that. Do we want to improve our plant, or do we want to go to South Burlington and work with them and do a joint effort? And right now, there's engineering investigations underway. We're going to have answers hopefully by June, and we'll be able to look at that and evaluate it better. Thank you.
Lee Suskin was reminding me that our school district consolidation and merger is an example of where that has happened, but not easily. Ken, do you have any thoughts about what on the school board you've learned and following that, and some of the, just briefly, what some of those hurdles were?
Certainly, I feel like Jerry made a good point that there's certain things that you don't want to share, and there's in the case of the school district, it appears that there were things that were quite beneficial that they combined. I've spoken a bit with Dave Connery about his efforts over the last few years of making consolidation happen. And it was a lot of work, and I think they're just getting to the point. I'm starting to hear evidence of where it's really starting to pay off. Like any of these projects, it takes time before you see the results of the work, and I think that's what's starting to show itself now. There was many examples of how they were able to work together, and one of the particular interests that I have is of this school lunch. And that was one of the big projects this last year that they took on. And I'll say from my personal perspective that I'm quite happy with the results so far. They not only were able to consolidate and improve things, but the school lunches are better. So they were able to tackle a problem as well as improve it. So for my personal experience, that's been mine is the school lunch. It's better, and I'm looking forward to get it even better than it is. So that's my own personal example, and I will say that there are some things where it does work out, and I was just to finish that when I was watching the budget meetings, you're starting to see it, and they kept pointing to the ones of where it's starting to pay off, and it was encouraging.
What may be the last question is economic development. There's three variations on that. One is, in 10 years, what do you think Route 7 north of the village will look like or should look like? Do you favor economic growth? If so, do you prefer residential over commercial or vice versa, and why? And what are your ideas about economic development for Shelburne? And I think I'm sensing from the questions, if you could say something specific, concrete, people would appreciate that. And we'll start on that with Jerry and then go to Luce.
Okay. We, nevertheless, I'm gonna edit my remarks because we have, as a select board, not yet had an extended discussion of what our economic development program, beginning as it will begin this spring, is going to be exactly comprised of. So that's a matter yet from my colleagues, and if so, myself, if not, or one of the folks here to sit and talk about. I think the emphasis in economic development is going to be to capitalize on our resources, some of which have to do with our attraction as a community, some of which have to do with our location, and particularly the location, our location on Route 7. Some of which have to do with what I hope will be our readiness to invite responsible, smart growth and ease it to the point that it has not been to this time as eased as it might be. We're struggling with some issues of regulatory reform, which I think are going to be instrumental in our program. And lastly, we're going to discuss whether a staffing position or a part staffing position is going to be beneficial enough to initiate this year, or whether that'll be a later development. We're proposing to the town an investment in economic development as a high priority activity. And it will run the range of everything from marketing of our existing businesses, promoting those, to strengthening our tax base by the introduction of high-value commercial establishments, particularly in Route 7.
Most of the economic development will be occurring along the Route 7 corridor, and you can see now there's several buildings that are empty. And I know that the Planning Commission looked at the form-based zoning to try to make denser development there so that we can get some growth. There's one building going up right now, and even though he struggled a little bit with the last snowstorm and had a little bit of snow piled up against his windows because it's a 2-lane state road, we're learning, and maybe that setback should be a little bit greater when we have that situation. But I think that's where you're going to see the growth. It's going to be on Route 7. Right now there's different plans of a green space versus dense development, and that's going to be our ticket to try to get a larger tax base for Shelburne.
Thank you. John, and then Ruth.
Thank you. Yeah, so economic development, I think a lot of times it's easy to just think if you build it, it will come. But really, I mean, economic development, it's about doing stuff that is going to really help the well-being and the quality of life around the town. So I'm actually really excited, fingers crossed, to see what happens in how we develop Route 7 over the next decade. I think we can just bring a lot of life to what is already there. I see it being, somewhat similar to what it is now in shape and size and everything, just revitalized. I think one thing that's really, really great about what we have in our town here, when we're talking about like residential and commercial development, I love that feeling when you're driving through town. You know it when you come right into town, right here. And it's just open, right? You have the square, you come by these buildings here, it's open. You don't have that claustrophobic feeling that so many towns, and even in Vermont now, are getting with these high density buildups. So I want us to build wisely where we can, so we're not forced in this position where we just, build this kind of looming high density buildings just because it's zoned for it. I'd really like to be a part of the select board and help just really design what Route 7 is going to look like for the next 10 years or so.
Thank you. Ruth, and then Kate.
So economic development, we've talked a lot about it, and like Jerry said, the select board really needs to decide how it's going to move forward with the money that it has allocated for this year, and then is it going to allocate more money next year? what I have picked up from some of these conversations about economic development is sort of this gloomy feeling, and I don't like that. I want us to say, Shelburne is so great, you want to come here because we're so great. And it's funny because I was thinking about this last week, and then on the weekend I saw that Pomerleau Real Estate actually took out a 2-page ad in the newspaper that said, Vermont is so great, and here's all the reasons, and you want to come to Vermont to have your business. So I really would like us to, every time we talk about economic development, to start off by saying Shelburne is so great and list some reasons and then say, we want you to come here. I think what we want for growth, and I would include Route 7 in this, is residential and services. I would like to see them mixed, and part of the reason is because I would like to see fewer cars on the road. I would like people to be able to hopefully walk to their job or at least walk to their coffee. But how that plays out is going to depend on how form-based zoning kind of works itself out over the next couple of years, because it's sort of in a field test right now, and I think some modifications will occur to it. So I do know that the economic development, about half of the ideas that I have about it are already on Lee's list of goals for this coming year, so there's no point talking about that. I did want to point out that the library, actually, one of the things we started talking about in 2014 with the library was business development and services. What could we provide? We are right now interviewing candidates for open positions on the trustees, and we are really trying to pull people out and say, hey, you know, how could you help us reach out to the business community and allow them to use this as a resource? So,
Thank you.
thanks.
And Kate?
Yeah, so last year I represented the town at the Vermont Development Conference. I reached out to them. They were looking for a municipal example of it's part of their mission to see how they can help municipalities. So I've sort of volunteered Shelburne for it, in particular the Route 7 corridor. Because we wanted to find out, you know, well, what do developers think of the form-based code and how viable is it? And so we got some great feedback. And one of the challenges that we've had is the code was only adopted as an optional code, which means that you don't have to use it. You can use the sort of awful zoning that is pre-existing that led to all the problems that we have, or you can use the form-based zoning. So it's a little irrational, but anyway. And so one of the things that you're selling with form-based code is a predictable approval process and a consistent built pattern that will emerge through revitalization. And in the case of Route 7, the vision for that would emerge over time is what we call nodes and segments. So that the nodes are to encourage development to concentrate in the places where it makes sense for it to be. And then, and so that is not a monolith of 2.5 miles between South Burlington and the village. That would actually be something much more minimal. And then actually having, encouraging maybe some unpaving of some of those sites and regreening with stormwater. There's opportunities to blend this in with form-based code. It's an amazing tool. But the bottom line is, we were told we really need a marketing plan for our town and for the corridor, and we need to be trained in how to use it, and that goes for staff and elected officials. And I'm out of time.
Thank you. We got the three more questions that we're unfortunately not going to get to. I would like to have the candidates, starting with John from my right, going down to the other end of the table in 30 seconds. We'll call this the lightning round. Just a closing statement.
I really appreciate you all coming out and getting to know us. Appreciate any follow-up questions that you have. Always like a good, tough question. But thanks for the opportunity. It's a great town. It'd be a pleasure to serve it.
So hi, thanks. I would like to strengthen our vision of place that we have in Shelburne, so we can set a framework for setting priorities and more effective decision making around how we allocate resources.
I would like to use my technical skills to help anything in the future that's coming our way, and I also am a fresh set of eyes for the challenges ahead. I don't have any set agendas, and I am a good collaborator and communicator, and I'd like to be part of the select board. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that I have a strong record of volunteering for the town. I will bring some skills to the select board that they're currently lacking. We have a philosopher, 2 attorneys, and someone with a large amount of experience in government. I think you can use a scientist because every different way you look at a question, you get a different answer. And in the end, you come up with the strongest possible answer. So I think that the town's got a lot of challenges, and I would like to help donate my time. I am looking forward to donating less time on the select board than I did working on the library. And so I think everybody came. It's great. Thank you.
In seeking to be reelected, I'm really being quite selfish because the opportunity is amazing. One example is here tonight where we're able to have these discussions, express these points of view, widen our horizons, encourage us to think a little more. And when you treat a subject like economic development, you don't want to miss the fact that in Shelburne, we have a very viable artisan economy. We have a substantial, robust at-home business economy. And these are the strengths to which you dedicate yourself in terms of service and to which you aspire.
Thank you. Ken?
I just want to thank the organizers tonight. I'd like to thank Tom and Lee. This has been incredibly educational, and I will say I feel very lucky to be part of this process, and I thank everyone for coming tonight.
I want to tell you so you don't think what we were hiding from you up here. The 3 questions that we didn't get to. If not elected, how will you serve the town? I think we don't have any doubts that they're going to continue their service. What are your thoughts on how to address short-term rentals, VRBO, Airbnb? We were very negatively affected for 3 years by one of those. And what role should the select board play in improving the environmental performance of Shelburne residents and businesses? So we'll get to those. Those will probably still be questions next year. Thank you very much. Nancy?
Thank you all. I want to thank David Webster, who kept all of us going, as well as all of you, Tom and Lee, VCAM, and thank you for coming out. Candidates will write their contact info, and Luce has provided a slip you can take home. And thank you. Get your neighbors out voting.